Hi everyone, I'm Cheryl Temple and welcome back to Stitchy Bee. I've had a few weeks break from YouTube because the kids have been off here in the UK, so it's been quite tricky finding time and the peace and quiet and space to record these. So here I am, it's now September, hooray, and the kids are back at school today, so I thought I'd take full advantage and chat to you guys. So hope you've had a good summer wherever you are in the world, and let's get started. Okay, so last time I spoke about my next make, which was going to be the Pattern House Harley Tunic Dress. And this is a pattern that came free with Sewing World magazine, the June 2017 issue, issue 256. I'll pop a bigger picture here so you can have a look. And I really liked the look of this because I like tunics, I like easy to wear clothes. I don't like a lot of things tight around my waist. So for a summer, even autumn item, I thought it'd be perfect. Now, this is what I'm wearing today. So last time I said I'd do a toile first just to make sure that the pattern works for me, and there were some unusual hidden pockets as well, which I wanted to check out, and I'm really glad I did. So the toile I made was this brown one. So I chose this really lightweight brown linen. As you can see, it creases as linen does, but it's really nice. I'll pop a couple of images of the top stitching as well that's actually on the front, which is a really lovely touch. Some hidden pockets, and this section's completely separate to the top, so they're stitched together. I'll show you the length because it's very short. As it would be, a true tunic should really come to kind of thigh length, and that's fine if you kind of just kicking around the house, or, you know, for me this is my kind of, I don't wear jogging bottoms and that kind of thing. This is the kind of thing I'd throw on because I get quite hot doing housework, and it's perfect really just to throw on for that. Lovely 3/4 sleeve, which I'm always a fan of, and yeah, I really love this. In fact, I like the practice run much nicer than the other colour, which is this gorgeous calamine lotion coloured, slightly thicker linen, and this is from Merchant and Mills, and I've had this in my stash for a while. I bought a couple of meters. It was quite expensive, so I wanted to make sure on my practice run that everything went okay first. So firstly, this is how the pattern arrived, which I was full of promise for, because I thought, oh great, I don't have to trace it or anything, but I actually did have to trace it. So to save paper, they've popped it on one sheet on both sides, so you can't cut it out, and it's layered in the different sections. So for me, the way I do this is to pop this over some brown parcel paper and use my tracing wheel to trace the actual pattern onto the brown paper. So here we go. I'll show you the tools that I used in a sec. So I created these nice brown paper pattern pieces, remembering to write down sleeve, for example, which pattern piece number it is, and also the grain line as well, so that you know how to lay it out on the fabric. There's not too many pieces actually. There's a couple of pieces for the top, a couple for the back, and then the lower skirt piece, and of course the pockets and the lining. So it's reasonably simple to do. There are some instructions inside the magazine itself, which is handy. If you're new to sewing, some of them might not be too obvious. For example, attaching the neckline facing can be a bit fiddly if you've not done it before, so it's probably worth having a look at a couple of tutorials on YouTube before you tackle this, because a couple of things aren't that clear. For example, the front of the tunic is joined here, so that's a line of stitching there. So when you actually attach the facing, you've also got the seam allowance to contend with, so it's not totally obvious where on the neckline you actually sew it. So I kind of fiddled around with it on this one, but I did it slightly different on this, which is why it's a wider V, and I quite like that. I'll swap over in a second, you can have a look how that looks on me, but I think colour wise, for my colouring, this chocolate linen looks nicer with my skin tone. I'm not so sure about this one, it kind of washes me out a little bit. So the other thing I also did with my proper version, if you like, is to lengthen it, because this is quite short when you're sitting down, and it's fine if you're at home, but I find a little bit more length is comfier. So I added 4 inches to the length of this, and that I found a little bit more comfortable for out and about. Now I found out one thing with the pattern. So when I was cutting out the lower part of the skirt, I found this piece was 3 centimeters too long when attaching to the top section. Now that could be me making a mistake, it could be me making a mistake tracing, but I've double checked it and I think I've done it right. So I can only imagine there's a little bit extra seam allowance that's not been accounted for, because if you imagine these 2 sections are sewn here, which would be 1.5 centimeters on each side, so it's just a bit funny that it's exactly 3. So I knocked off 3 centimeters on my lower pattern piece when I made this version, and it worked out beautifully. I actually had to stitch it right down the bottom for this to make it work, because I'd already cut it out in the fabric, and it worked. It's one of those kind of happy accidents that you can get away with, but it does mean you've got to line up both seams here. So if you do make this, look out for that, because I think it might be too wide, this bottom piece, but it might be me. It's quite possibly me, but it's good to check these things anyway. So I'm really glad I had a practice run with this dress. I'll show you quickly how it looks in the other way. Okay, I've swapped over the dresses so you can see how this one looks on, and as you can see it's longer, so it's still above the knee, so it could have a tendency to be a bit sack-like, this dress, because it's quite loose fitting. I made the size 4. And I'm a size 14, and there's room. However, it's not the easiest thing, being a woven fabric, to get over your head in a fabric that's got very little give. So you have to have a reasonable amount of looseness to be able to throw it on. And of course the different fabrics give a different effect. So this is quite a lightweight linen, this is a slightly heavier weight washed linen. So again, just make allowances for that, but it is worth doing a practice run on them both. I'll pop a couple of close-ups so you can see the top stitching. So there's top stitching down the front of the front panel, and I top stitched the back as well on this. So that's quite a nice touch actually, and it's not something I usually add to my clothes that I wear, unless it states it in the pattern. So I think I'm going to do that again. And also, I'm not sure whether I should have done this, but I top stitched the shoulder for the pure reason to keep down the facing, because as you know, I'm not a fan of interfacings and facings, so because I don't like how they flap about. But that's really worked, but you've got to be really sure about it being in the right place before you do top stitch it if you do that. So I'm not really recommending it, but it worked for me on this one. Failing that, the proper way to do it is to hand tack the interfacing on the facing to the seam allowance on the insides, so you can catch a couple of stitches on the insides here and on the middle part as well, just to keep that facing lying flat. So there's a couple of tips for that. So yeah, overall I really quite enjoyed this. I'm not a big fan of making toiles all the time, because I usually get bored by the time I've come to the end of the first thing, and trying to do it during the holidays with the kids has not been too easy. So I'm glad I finished them both, but you know what, I love this. It's really easy to wear, so I'm glad I made it. Now, tools wise, I used a few tools. I'm going to start talking about tools on each of my reviews, because I think it's worthwhile. So when I traced the pattern out, I used a tracing wheel, and most people will be familiar with these. It's a kind of spiky wheel. I've got a better one than this actually. This one's quite a cheap one, but I'll pop a link to my favourite one in the comments underneath. So that's an easy way of actually tracing a pattern from an original onto some paper underneath. I really find those quite handy to use. Also, I use Tailor's chalk, the traditional triangular shaped white Tailor's chalk, but I find on some fabrics it doesn't show up that well unless you really kind of score it. I think it's great on suit material. If you know the traditional tailors, when they draw out their patterns, it always looks beautiful because they're using dark fabrics. But if you're on a fabric like this and you want to use Tailor's chalk, you can either use the blue or red ones, the triangular ones, or you can use one of these. And this is, the cap comes off and it's a little wheel, and it makes a line of chalk like that on your fabric, and you can buy refills for the inside of these, and I love this, and it's got that reassuring click as well, which you can kind of hear where it's going, so I like that, and they're not too expensive. I'll pop a link to where you can buy those below as well. Now the other tool that I used was a tailor's ham. You may or may not have seen these. It's a really tightly stuffed shaped block, if you like, and it's probably, I think it's usually got sawdust in, and then it's stitched up. You can make these yourself. I didn't. I bought this one online, and I used this to actually press the darts. So there's a couple of French darts on this dress, so they're the darts that go diagonal, and that helps to shape the actual top part or the bodice. And because darts are designed to create a 3D shape around the body, it's really nice just to take that time to press them so that the dart actually does curve over. So I'd pop this inside the dress and pop it on the ironing board, and then when you're pressing the dart, just carefully with the toe of the iron, just press it over the nice curved edge. So that kind of creates the bust shape, so that you're not completely pressing everything flat. When I first started sewing, I had a tendency to do that, and it can stretch your fabric out as well, because I got a bit obsessed by making everything so neat. So you just have to be a bit careful and press it gently with a tailor's ham. I'll pop a link to where you can buy these below as well. So yeah, there you go. That's everything for the tunic. Really nice to make. There's lots of variations you could make as well. So you could add some embroidery around the neckline, you could add some lace around it, or you could make it in different colours. I think it'd look really nice in an off-white, maybe as a beach cover up for the summer in a size larger perhaps, so you could just throw it on easier. Or even a muslin. I really fancy making a beach cover up from muslin, because it's quite see-through, but that's fine on a beach, isn't it? It's just to throw on. So yeah, there's lots of choices with regard to tunics, so I'm really glad I made these. Okay, so next week I'm going to talk about something a little bit different. I've been buying PDF patterns for quite a while now, and storage is a bit of an issue, so I'm going to talk about how I store my PDF patterns, because I've discovered a couple of really good ways, and I'd like to share those with you as well. And if you've got any ideas or tips on how you store yours, then pop along in next week's and we'll have a chat, or give me a couple of ideas below now. So yeah, that's it for me this week. I will definitely be back next week. Now I've got a bit more time to myself during the day. So thank you very much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, be great if you can. And we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye for now.